It is October 7th, 2022. I'm here today talking about Proposal 2 in the state of Michigan, and this is an election-based proposal. You may remember it was only 2 years ago we voted on an election ballot initiative. That one did a lot of things. Chief among them, you might remember, was establishing no reason absentee voting. This one, it's not all bad. There are elements in here I completely agree with, but there are some very highly objectionable provisions that are within this, and I guess you can probably tell by now I am opposed to Proposal 2. So I just want to kind of go through some of what these objections are, so that way people know what they're voting on and understand the consequences and the significance of them. So I guess I'll start with this. This is Proposal 2. Compared to Proposal 3, it is much longer. It's about 4.5 pages of, looks like size 7 or 8 font. It would take me way too long to actually read through all of it. So I'm going to start by just reading what's the summary that's actually on the ballot that you'll see. So I'm going to read through that real quick. This proposed constitutional amendment would recognize fundamental right to vote without harassing conduct, require military or overseas ballots be counted if postmarked by Election Day, provide voter right to verify identity with photo ID or signed statement, provide voter right to single application to vote absentee in all elections, require state-funded absentee ballot drop boxes and postage for absentee applications on ballot, provide that only election officials may conduct post-election audits, require 9 days of early in-person voting, allow donations to fund elections which must be disclosed, require canvass boards certify election results based only on official records of votes cast. So I guess before I get into any of the details here, I just want to point out this proposal needs to be taken in its totality. Like I said, there's elements here that aren't bad. I don't think that voters should be harassed when they go to the polls. But you can't just take that one section without taking and looking at the parts that are objectionable. If I had to kind of summarize what this bill would do, or this proposal would do, it would basically enshrine vote by mail in the state of Michigan permanently going forward, and it would also prohibit any type of voter ID requirement from being put into law going forward as well. And that's because, as I said, this is a constitutional amendment. It would supersede any type of statute that the legislature would make going forward. So just to really drive home this fact, I'm going to read actually the first paragraph of this ballot initiative, and you'll see just how restrictive it would be on the legislature going forward. The fundamental right to vote, including but not limited to the right once registered to vote a secret ballot in all elections, no person shall 1. Enact or use any law, rule, regulation, qualification, prerequisite, standard, practice, or procedure. 2. Engage in any harassing, threatening, or intimidating conduct. Or 3. Use any means whatsoever, any of which has the intent or effect of denying, abridging, interfering with, or unreasonably burdening the fundamental right to vote. So, I'm completely for making sure voters don't feel harassed or threatened, but the specific words here, especially having any type of unreasonably burdening the fundamental right to vote, that's basically just allowing the court systems just to say any law that the legislature would put going forward that would have anything to do with really making sure our elections are secure, it would just give them carte blanche to strike anything down. So it's a really big deal. This is extremely broad. It actually couldn't be any more broad. And it's just a very, very important thing to understand what you're voting on here. So I don't want to understate the significance of this first objection, but in order to try to get through these in a timely manner, I'm going to move on to kind of my second main objection. And this deals with the 9 days of early voting. I've seen this being used in TV commercials to try to sell on how good this proposal is, because you could go vote early and be really efficient for the person who wants to go vote. I would argue that it's completely not necessary because of the last ballot initiative we had in 2020. If anybody wants to go vote early right now, they could go down to their clerk's office if they're not already in the absentee voting process. They could request their ballot, they could go through the process, they could fill it out right there, put it back in the envelope and hand it back to the clerk, and they're done. The difference here between the early voting and the absentee voting process is when the votes are being tabulated. There would have to be, through this proposal, 3 people working at the precinct in order to actually tabulate the votes throughout that 9 days. We'll get into the cost of that in a little bit, but that's the main difference. It's more of a back end type difference. So I guess my main point here is I think this is a solution in search of a problem. From a voter's perspective, if you want to go vote, you're more than welcome to go to the clerk's office through our current absentee voting process. So moving on to objection number 3, the costs. This is a big one. There are no good estimates as to what this would cost. And I can tell you from a legislative standpoint, I have voted on many things that have a cost implication with them. It's always something that is highly debated, and it is integral into the conversation as to when policy gets enacted. Nobody has any idea how much this is going to cost. I mean, if you look at just the 9 days of early voting, the impact and significance this would have on rural districts, it would be massive. I mean, I have small townships in my district. They don't have a lot of money. And then to just throw this administrative burden on them, I'm being told there needs to be at least 3 people working at the polling locations that need to be, they need to be paid and compensated for their, at least 8 hours a day for 9 days of being there. That has a cost. They might have to buy new equipment. The costs of making sure that the state funds the sending out of the applications and the ballots, so there wouldn't be any cost to the voter to return them. There are a lot of costs that are associated with this. I would bet we're talking in the tens of millions of dollars, and I would not be surprised if it went over even $100 million for each election cycle. So again, I literally have no idea. I've seen an estimate in a Bridge magazine where they said the cost could be 80 million. I just think this is really putting the cart in front of the horse. I wouldn't do this in any other type of bill that came up in a legislative capacity. So I just really think people need to understand that this is not free. There is a taxpayer expense that is associated with this type of magnitude of a policy change. So moving on to objection number 4, and this is a big one, security. I think the biggest provision in here that would undermine voter security is the putting in our Constitution that you can't require a ID to vote. That's pretty significant. It basically would enshrine what our current law is. So right now you can show your ID, or you can sign an affidavit basically saying this is my identity, and that's a big deal. The other one here is the use of public sources or charitable sources of funding to fund elections. This is very dangerous. The idea that these funds would not be used to try to have some type of partisan impact to drive out the vote is nonsense. I mean, we saw this with the Mark Zuckerberg dollars, commonly known as the Zuckerbucks, that were used nationally, and yes, very much here in the state of Michigan. This is dangerous. I mean, this is something where you need to have state dollars. There needs to be the one funding the election, so that way there's no ulterior motive, and it's just something that is safe and reliable, and voters have comfort knowing that these dollars are not trying to influence the vote. They're trying to just make sure that we have a secure and fair vote. So I'll kind of wrap up with this. I mean, I've talked about my 4 biggest objections to this ballot measure. Are there elements of it that are good? Yeah, absolutely. But taking it in totality, it's not worth risking the security of our elections. It's not worth signing up for something without understanding what the actual costs are that are associated with it. And then also the constitutional nature of this is going to be a massive roadblock. It's going to prevent the legislature from implementing future election law on a really, really wide scale. So I appreciate your time. Again, I'm going to be a no on Proposal 2. I hope others are as well. And thank you, and God bless.